Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bay Area Community Church. Whether you're in Odenton, online, Annapolis, or the chapel, we're glad you're with us today. My name's Aaron. I'm one of our pastors. And now as I say that, I can't remember if I've already said my name is Aaron. I don't know if I said it twice or not. It doesn't matter. My name's still Aaron, and I'm one of our pastors. Glad you are with us today. My wife, Lauren, and I lived in Rochester, New York for 8 years before we moved here to Annapolis. We've been here 4 years. We loved our time in Western New York. Rochester's an awesome city, tons of history, and it's known for a few different things. One of the things it's known for is, you might not know this, it's actually the headquarters, the corporate headquarters for the grocery store chain, Wegmans. We got some Wegmans fan in the house, okay? It's the best grocery store, bar none. It's amazing. Gotta love Wegmans. Up there, though, it's like a cult, okay? Like, if you ever get some groceries at Aldi, just don't tell anybody because they will not be happy. But anyway, Wegmans is up there. You have Rochester to thank for that amazing chain. But then also, it was the headquarters, still is the corporate headquarters for a company that used to be very big, very dominant, and it is the company Kodak. Kodak was headquartered in Rochester, New York. And there was a time when Kodak was a global company. I mean, this was a massive organization. And look, it was founded by George Eastman in the late 1800s. And it was at a time when photography was inaccessible to most people. It was very expensive. It was difficult to do. And so the vision of George Eastman was to make photography accessible for everyone. Their saying was, you just push the button and we'll do the rest. So this was the idea. Oh, remember that sound? Oh, there's the click. All right, let's see if the flash will make a sound. Maybe you heard it. All right, here we go. Smile. I'm not going to post it. It doesn't have Wi-Fi, okay? But yeah, so this was the whole thing. I mean, you guys remember this stuff? We got film right here. Remember 35 millimeter film, right? You just I'm ruining it right now as I expose it to the light. But this stuff was, I mean, this was everything. My whole childhood is you go on vacation and then you find out, I wonder what I took a photo of while I was there. I don't know. Hard to say. We'll find out in 6 months if I ever get it developed. But yeah, that was it, right? This is how you took photos. And so Kodak became synonymous with cameras, with film. In fact, a Kodak Moment, right, was a moment that was something you'd want to take a photo of that was worth preserving the memory. And man, it is hard to exaggerate how dominant and powerful Kodak was as a company. Because they had mastered a process in terms of the chemical processes of developing film that was very difficult, and they had mastered it, and they looked like an unstoppable juggernaut for the future of everything that was film. And then digital photography happened, right? And Kodak missed it. Kodak missed it. And the crazy thing is, they didn't miss it because they didn't have the technology. They had developed a digital camera in-house, but they decided not to run with this camera. They didn't want to use that product because they thought, first of all, people won't want it. They were film snobs, so they're like, the color saturations and whatever. It's I don't even know what any of those words mean. But they thought for sure people didn't. I just want to keep doing this. I got to be honest. Hold on, can you take a selfie with one of these? I haven't even thought about it. I guess that's what you do. That's it. That's the end. But anyway, they decided not to run because they thought people didn't want it. Or second of all, they thought this cuts against our core business. What did they think was their core business? They thought their core business was film. They said, this is what we do. Film is who we are. And probably 1 million business books have been written about the fall of this previously amazing company. But the question is just, how did it happen? And I think the most poignant answer that I know of is this. Kodak ultimately failed because they mistakenly thought that they were in the film business. They thought they were in the film business, but the truth was they weren't in the business of film. They were in the business of making and preserving memories. That's what they were really doing. And so it wasn't about the chemistry or the richness of the color saturations in 35 millimeter. It was the joy that came from seeing your loved ones and remembering moments and seeing faces long after people were gone, or seeing locations that you've never actually traveled to. In other words, what happened with Kodak was they lost the why in the what. They lost the why in the what. Kodak said, who are we? We make film. It's our purpose and it's our identity. But imagine with me, imagine if someone had been able to get contact with the C-suite at Kodak and convince them that actually your core identity is this. You don't make film, you make memories, right? Here's just a photo of my family. This one, the nice one, was taken by my brother. He's a professional photographer at Christmas this last year. That's a memory we have. Or the Christmas before, that selfie that was taken at BWI on Christmas Day, where we're flying to see family in matching Christmas PJs. It's just a memory, right? What mattered to us is preserving the moment. We don't care how it's recorded. The easier, the better, right? Imagine someone had been able to convince Kodak of that. That, look, your core thing is actually memories. Kodak moments are what you're selling, not film. If someone had helped them see that, they would have been able to understand the why behind film. It could have changed everything. They would have welcomed the digital camera that they had developed as just a natural development of what their core business was. Digital should have been seen as just the easier way for an average person to capture the moments in life that mattered to them. That was the original vision of George Eastman in the first place. Make it easy. Digital is even easier. They should have embraced it as the obvious development of their core business. But instead, they lost the why in the what. And as a result of that, now, a Kodak moment in the business world today doesn't mean a moment you want a photo of. It means a company that has misunderstood its purpose, and so it gets wiped out by technology when it disrupts the market. A Kodak moment is a bad thing. And so why do I tell you all of this? If I was still in Rochester, there'd be a lot of people that are like, it's still too soon. It's still too soon. But why do I tell you? I tell you this because I think it pretty well summarizes one of the central tensions of the book of Hebrews. Okay, the author, the pastor, is trying to tell his people and convince them you need to stick with Jesus. You need to see Jesus rightly and hold him tightly to the end. That's how we've been saying it. And he wants them to do this despite the fact that sticking with Jesus is going to cause them extra pressure. If they reverted to their old way of Judaism, it would have relieved the pressure from the Roman government. But in many ways, another way to state the case that he's making for his people is just, guys, you've misunderstood what business you're in. When it comes to the Old Testament law and living out God's restrictions that you've been living under, you've misunderstood it. You don't know what business you're in. You're drawn back to the what. The what is the old covenant, the old way of living that God had laid out in the Old Testament. It's almost as if they were doing what Kodak had done. They thought to themselves, because of the old covenant, we're in the dietary laws business. We're in the tabernacle making business. And that's understandable because that had been their whole thing. God spent a lot of the Old Testament talking about all the laws that they were supposed to follow. They thought that was what they were about. But that was just the what. It wasn't the why. What was the why? The why of the old covenant was to draw near to God. It was the memories. It's the equivalent for Kodak. It's the memory. It's the purpose of the thing. The purpose of the old covenant was to draw near to God. They're not in the sacrifice business. They're in the draw near to God business. And so what the author has been doing in this section is convincing them that the purpose of the old way was to enable sinful people to draw near to a holy God. And so they should not be threatened by a new and permanent way to do that. And he knows if he can convince them of this fact, that they're going to stick with Jesus. He will no longer be perceived as sort of a threat to their core identity. He'll just be the natural fulfillment of what they've been doing all along. He's not a threat to the old way. He's a fulfillment of the old way. And so that's what he's been trying to do and what he's going to continue to do in Hebrews chapter 9, which we're going to go over this morning. And I'm telling you all of this sort of as a prologue because we have 28 verses to cover this morning. That's a lot of material. And so we're going to do a couple of things a little differently. One, instead of using the ESV, the English Standard Version, the version we normally use, fantastic translation, we're going to use the NIV this morning, the New International Version, another great English translation, but it's just slightly easier at a lower reading level. So I think it'll help us as we cover more material. And we have a lot to cover. And as a result of that, I'm going to describe this time as like a flyover, okay? We're not going to be able to cover every detail. And so before we take off, I want to identify for you the landmarks that you're going to see so that before we take off, when we get up in the air, you'll actually be able to see what we're hoping to notice because I've told you in advance. Okay, so what should we be looking for? How does he build his case about the new way? Well, he's talking about drawing near to God. So first what he does is he outlines the old way. How does someone draw near to God in the old way? And he talks a little while about the tabernacle, which is a tent that the people of God built in order to host God when he was in the middle of their company. So he outlines the old way, and then he outlines the new way to draw near to God with a heavenly tabernacle, and we'll talk more about that. But you'll be able to tell throughout that he's working hard to show the continuity between the two systems. They have the same purpose. Yes, you need to see there's something new, there's something different about this new way, but the purpose is the same. We're still just drawing near to God. And the main point that he's going to be building toward is this, that through his death, Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. Through his death, Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. He's not a threat. He's not a liability. He is simply the new, permanent, superior fulfillment of the old way to draw near to God. So with all that sort of as the precursor, let's go ahead and jump into Hebrews chapter 9, verse 1. Let's see how he outlines the old way to draw near to God. Verse 1 says this. Now the first covenant had regulations for worship and also an earthly sanctuary. A tabernacle was set up. Okay, so we're talking about the old way. That's the first covenant. And he immediately starts talking about the tabernacle. The tabernacle was simply, like I said, a tent that was set up by the people of God to host the presence of God among them. And so how do you pitch a tent for God? The answer is very specifically. Verses 2 through 5, it says, in its first room of this tent were the lampstand and the table with its consecrated bread. This was called the holy place. Behind the second curtain was a room called the most holy place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered ark of the covenant. Inside of the ark, it contained a gold jar of manna and Aaron's staff that had budded and the stone tablets of the covenant. Above the ark were the cherubim of the glory, overshadowing the atonement cover. Now look, we're not going to belabor all the details of the tabernacle, okay? We could genuinely get lost in a long series of sermons about all the symbolism and imagery here, and that would be a great study. It would be very fruitful. But our purpose today is just to get the big picture, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time here. We did put some resources on our website. If you want to go to the resource page, we have some videos there. YouTube is actually just full of really nice 3D renderings of what the tabernacle would have looked like. People have built it, and they've got camera walkthroughs. There's lots of great information, actually, about the tabernacle. If you want to know more, I encourage you to do that. You can get some on our website and do some of your own exploring. But I just want to give you the very simple version of what you need to understand is the tabernacle, what he's saying here, is a tent with two rooms in it, okay? One was called the holy place. It had various objects in it. And the second part of this tent was called the most holy place, just a tent with two rooms. The most holy place is where God's presence literally lived. And you get the sense from those first few verses that being in the tabernacle was like a pretty strenuous thing. Okay, this is not like, the tabernacle is not like a hammock where you put your feet up and have a beverage with an umbrella in it or something. That's not what we're doing here. This is a serious place. It's the presence of God. So he gives all these details, but then he says this in verse 5. But we cannot discuss these things in detail now. And I'm kind of the first 4 verses wasn't in detail? I think we have different definitions of what that phrase means. Felt pretty detailed to me. But he knows, and the original audience knows, if they go to Exodus chapter 25, where this material originally is, they won't find 5 verses. They'll find 15 chapters of details about how to build the tabernacle and how to set it up. Okay, there's a lot of content. He knows this is just scratching the surface, reminding them how the tabernacle worked. So we're going to keep moving here. How did they access God's presence? How did they get to that second chamber in the most holy place? Well, he says in verse 6, when everything had been arranged like this, according to the details, the priests entered regularly into the outer room to carry on their ministry. On a normal day, the priests just did their thing, but they only were in the outer room. So how could you draw all the way near? Well, verse 7 says, but only the high priest entered the inner room. That's the most holy place. And that only once a year, and never without blood, which he offered for himself and for the sins the people had committed in ignorance. What we're seeing here is that crossing that curtain into the most holy place required a number of things. Again, this was not seamless. This was not order on the app, mobile to go. This was serious, extremely limited. Only the high priest, the human high priest from the right lineage could go in. And that only once a year. But he has to go every year, or their sins for the past year wouldn't be forgiven. So while it is rare, it's also repeated. And then also, of course, he has to bring blood with him. This animal blood proved that something has died in order to take the punishment for sins. But notice he has to bring enough blood not only to pay for his sins, but also for the sins of the entire nation. Okay, so that's the old way. He's reminding them of this. But there's this crazy reality that he brings up about the old way. And it's this. This is really surprising to me. None of this, all of that stuff they just did, none of it truly cleansed the people of sin from the inside out. Look at this in verse 9. The gifts and the sacrifices being offered, they were not able to clear the conscience of the worshiper. They were only a matter of food and drink and various ceremonial washings, external regulations, applying until the time of the new order. He makes the same point later in the chapter, verse 13. It says, the blood of goats and bulls and the ashes of a heifer sprinkled on those who are ceremonially unclean, sanctify them so that they are outwardly clean. This is remarkable to me because look, all this ritual, all the ceremony, all the process, all the rules, all the formality, it still wasn't enough. The net result of all of that was just to cleanse the body. They were outwardly clean, but not truly forgiven or cleansed at the level of their conscience from the inside. We need to keep that in mind as we go through. That was the result. Cleanse the body. So what's the overview of the old way? That the people of Israel, they drew near to God via the priest in the tabernacle, and this system is what they were living under. And frankly, it's what they were tempted to return to. But here's the part that kind of blows my mind. Not only did this system not allow personal access to God, we find out that actually it was designed, the whole thing was designed to make it clear that you don't have access to God. That's the message it was sending. Verse 8, it says, by all this stuff, the Holy Spirit indicates that the way into the holy places is not yet opened, as long as the first section is still standing, symbolic for the present age. What's he saying? He's saying that the tabernacle and the whole system was designed to say to everyone, to communicate to them, you cannot have direct access to God. And if I'm looking at that system, I would be like, got it, message received, right? Pretty clear. Pretty clear. It kind of reminds me of the White House. The White House, by the way, is the presidential mansion for the United States. It's in Washington, D.C. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it in this area. But anyway, it's where he lives. And so anyway, at the White House, I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure that there's not like a no soliciting sign at the front door. Again, I can't confirm. I haven't seen it, but I'm pretty sure they don't need one. And that's because of, I don't know, the gates and the cameras and the guys with the guns. Right? Pretty clear. We don't have access. You can't just walk up to that thing. You can't just sell your stuff at the front door. Okay? You don't have access. Message clearly communicated by all of the stuff. That's exactly where the tabernacle and the sacrificial system was saying. Drawing near to God is crucial, but it's impossible on your own. So, this message is coming straight from the tabernacle and from the system. And there was one more message that the tabernacle and the system was communicating, and he turns to that next. And we need to remember that throughout it all, he's trying to wean these people off of their reliance on this system. Every new angle that he's introducing is designed to lessen their allegiance to the old way so that they can more readily accept the new way. And what's the other angle he introduces? We see it in verse 11. It says, but when Christ came as a high priest of the good things that are now already here, he went through the greater and more perfect tabernacle. It's not made with human hands. That is to say, it's not a part of this creation. We're finding out that actually everything about the earthly tabernacle was also meant to communicate that they should draw their eyes upward toward the spiritual reality that all these physical items in the tent were illustrating. In chapter 8, he had said it this way, that all of these things, they serve at a sanctuary that's a copy. It's a shadow of what's in heaven. We're finding out that the earthly tabernacle was just a shadow of what is a true tabernacle that's in heaven. The tabernacle was never actually like the real thing. It was just a model. It was like a scale drawing of what existed in heaven. And do you see how, again, he's subtly lowering their view of the old way to maximize their view of the new way? He's telling them that Jesus went into the Holy of Holies as our high priest. He's opened the way for us to follow him into the presence of God. And he didn't do this like by just going behind like some man-made curtain and some man-made tent in the desert. No, he went into the actual presence of God in heaven to accomplish this goal. How did he do it? Well, verse 12, look at the contrast. He didn't enter by means of the blood of goats and calves. He entered the most holy place once for all by his own blood, thus obtaining eternal redemption. Look, this is like a point-for-point contrast with the old way that he described. He says he's the heavenly high priest, our high priest, not from the line of Aaron, from the line of Melchizedek. It's a better priesthood, not the symbolic one, the real thing. And he entered there once for all, not once a year. He doesn't have to go back and back. It's once and done. And he doesn't enter by animal blood. He enters by his own blood because he doesn't need a substitute to die for him. He's the permanent solution. And notice he says what this results in is eternal redemption. Remember, the old way couldn't fully cleanse, but this new way is different. Verse 14, how much more then will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself unblemished to God, how much more will the blood of Christ cleanse our consciences from acts that lead to death, so that we may serve the living God? It doesn't just cleanse the body, temporarily covering over sin for the past year. It cleanses us eternally at the deepest point. The result is not to cleanse the body, it's to cleanse the conscience. Not temporarily freed, we're fully released from all condemnation through the death of Christ. So what have we seen? We're seeing that the old way was all about drawing near to God. And the new way is all about drawing near to God. But it does so permanently and perfectly for everyone. But why? What's the point? What's he getting at here? He's driving at this point as his bottom line in verse 15. He says, for this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free from the sins committed under the first covenant. This is it. This is his thesis. This is the whole point of chapter 9. We saw it earlier, but we're seeing it again, that through his death, Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. This is vital, but why is it so crucial? It's crucial because if it's true, then they're not really losing anything by leaving behind the old way. The point of the old way was to point them to the new way. He's saying you're not losing a tabernacle, you're gaining a heavenly one. You're getting to experience in the fullest way possible the whole purpose of the law in the first place, which was to enable you to draw near to God. And because of Christ, you can. You can draw near to God through his death. Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. But I want to acknowledge something here that I think is particularly acute for people maybe who are newer to Christianity. Maybe you're here today and you're not even sure where you are in your relationship with Jesus. Someone invited you, you're checking things out, or online, somebody sent you this link. Maybe they tricked you into watching it. We've seen that before. It happens to the best of us. But anyway, no matter why you're here, we're glad you're here. And you just had to listen to me cough, for which I apologize. But you might have questions. This gets lost on people who've been around for a while. But if you're newer, I think you look at passages like this and you ask, why is there so much blood? Why is there blood everywhere? Like, why is stuff constantly dying in the Bible? Every time somebody gets near to God, like, people die, stuff dies, and there's blood just like sprinkled on stuff. That's weird, right? Like, have you ever sung the song, "There is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins"? That's weird sounding, right? Like, if you don't know what that means, like, why are we singing about fountains of blood? That's strange. It's a perfectly valid question, and I want to explain it a little bit because the author actually spends 12 verses talking about why there's so much blood. It's not random. Because why didn't God just make it easy? Why didn't you just throw open the doors? Everybody, come on in. Come as you are. In these 12 verses, he gives a reason, and he gives a principle that drives the whole thing. And before we get into the details, I just want to give you that principle. This is why there's so much blood when it comes to drawing near to God. Hebrews 9:22 gives us the answer. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. So the principle he's telling us is actually pretty simple. Sin requires death. Sin requires death. Why would that be? Well, because at the most simple level, God is holy. He's perfect, which means he's set apart in every way from anything that could even resemble evil. And he created the universe, which means he designed it to operate according to specific rules. And thus, if you break the rules in any way, it is to commit treason against the Creator. Even what we would think of as the smallest kind of infraction against these rules is actually an act of treason, an eternal and unrecoverable evil, a rebellion against the Creator. And what's the penalty for treason? The penalty for treason is death. It's the shedding of the blood of the creature that did the rebellion. A just judge demands an adequate consequence. We expect that from our human judges, and God is the perfect judge. And death is the adequate consequence for treason. But God made a way in this system for a substitute to take the place of a human who commits treason. An animal can actually receive the death that that person owes, but the animal has to be totally without any physical blemishes to illustrate the fact that in order to be a substitute, they would need to have no sin of their own if they're going to pay for the sin of something else. So a physically spotless creature can take the place of a human, but only temporarily. Forgiveness is not free. The penalty cannot be overlooked. A good judge would never just let it slide. Something must die. Blood must be shed, or a holy God cannot have a relationship with sinful creatures. So the principle is sin requires death. That is why there's so much blood in the Scriptures. And the author spends a few verses explaining how this principle applied in the old way. You see it show up a bunch. 18 through 22 says this. This is why even the first covenant was not put into effect without blood. Death was a part of all of it. When Moses had proclaimed every command of the law to all the people, what did he do? He took the blood of calves, together with water, scarlet wool, and branches of hyssop. He sprinkled the scroll, get this, and all the people with the blood. He sprinkled them with blood, and he said, "This is the blood of the covenant, which God has commanded you to keep." In the same way, he also sprinkled with the blood the tabernacle and everything used in its ceremonies. In fact, he says, the law requires that nearly everything be cleansed with blood. Blood was everywhere. Why? Because sin requires death, and the life of a creature is found in its blood. So blood has to be shed to demonstrate the death of a thing that's paying the price, purifying the objects that are touched with this sprinkled blood. But it wasn't just this way in the old way. It's also this way in the new way. He says this in verse 23. It was necessary then. It's like, if we have to do this with the copies of the heavenly things to be purified by these sacrifices, the heavenly things themselves need to be purified with better sacrifices than these. Christ didn't enter a sanctuary made with human hands. That was just a copy of the true one. No, he entered heaven itself now to appear for us in God's presence. If blood is necessary in the old way, it's with stuff that's just a copy. It's definitely necessary with an even better sacrifice in the new way. Jesus provides the sacrifice. But that introduces a problem, because Jesus is just one person. In the old way, these sacrifices could go on and on and on, over and over, because you could just go get another spotless creature to take the place of the human. But Jesus is just one person. He can't die over and over. There's only so much blood. So how is this going to work? Well, we find out that because he's a heavenly priest, he can offer an eternal death that can be offered just once for all. And that this one death would be sufficient for all sin for all time. Verse 25 says, "Nor did he enter into heaven to offer himself again and again, the way the high priest enters the most holy place every year with blood that's not his own. Otherwise, Christ would have had to suffer many times since the creation of the world. But he has appeared once for all at the culmination of the ages to do away with the sin by sacrifice of himself." Just as people, he says, are destined to die once, and after that they face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of the many. And he will appear a second time, he says, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. Over the next 2 weeks, Greg's going to have a chance to really drill down on this once-for-all nature of Christ's death in chapter 10. But the important thing here, the principle, is that sin requires death, and it showed up clearly in the old way. It shows up clearly in the new way. Why? Because they are both designed to do the exact same thing. Enable a sinful human to draw near to a holy God. Which brings us again to his thesis. His thesis is that through his death, Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. Just like Kodak, these people had lost the why and the what. Kodak thought they were in the film business. They were in the memories business. These Hebrew believers were losing the why for the what. And their pastor is pointing them back. What's the purpose? Jesus is the better, perfect, more permanent way to access God because of how he accomplished our salvation and because of who he is. Don't lose the why in the what. So, what do we take away from this? What do we take away from this? I know this has been a fast and furious flyover. It might feel like a lecture, but I want to give us something to walk away with. And there are probably 100 things theologically that we could point to that are, I believe, important for followers of Jesus to come to understand. But most of what I would point out might not seem, or that we've heard, it might not seem very practical or applicable, but they are nonetheless important things for us to know, because this is key. The Bible, it's not a self-help manual. That's not the purpose of the Bible. It's not a book that's just constantly inclined toward the next best practice or a life hack, improve your marriage, get better at your job, makes you better at life and your life better. Okay, that's not the purpose of the Bible. Now, don't get me wrong, because there's lots in the Bible, there's actually lots in Hebrews that will improve your marriage and make you better at your job and make you better at life, okay? When you work in alignment with how the Creator made the world, it actually turns out better. Okay, so there are benefits that are practical from the Scriptures. But the Bible is not primarily a book of life tips. It's God's revelation of himself to us. And so some of what we need to know from the Bible is just facts, like information describing the more technical side of how salvation works. So in that sense, I would argue that Hebrews 9 is actually insanely practical because it's about the mechanism by which you have salvation. Pretty practical. But at the same time, I recognize that especially in our world, I know I can go to the Scriptures sometime with but I want to do something with this. What do I do? So let me give us a couple of practical takeaways. The first one being this. We need to thank Jesus for his death and for the access it provides. Thank Jesus for his death and the access it provides. Jesus died in our place so we could draw near to God. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of all of our sins. So literally, thank Jesus that it's not our blood that has to be shed to get the forgiveness. He died in our place. By doing so, he makes the new way possible. But something else that I think gets overlooked, and that actually someone on our team pointed this out to me as we were talking about the sermon this week. She was reminding me that, yes, everything we've talked about in Hebrews 9 is about how we should draw near to God, what we need to do in order to be close to God. But she reminded me that we can't miss the fact that at every point in history, God has desired to be near his people. He's drawn near to us. At every point in history, he has made provisions to literally be in the middle of the camp with his people, even when those provisions were extremely costly to both him and his people. He wanted proximity. He pursued it. He wanted to be near to us. He sent Jesus and literally named him Emmanuel, God with us, the holy, perfect God living and dwelling among his people. It says in John 1 that he came and he dwelt among us. The verb there literally is he tabernacled with us. He came to be the presence of God in our midst. So let's be thankful, drawing near to him while remembering that he drew near to us. We draw near to him through our praise and through our obedience, and we know that when we draw near to God, he will draw near to you. So let's express thankfulness. But then also we need to assess. Let's assess if it's possible that we too have lost sight of the why in the what of our obedience. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because in this first century context, these Hebrews, they're not different than us. Fundamentally, they're people who have the same proclivities that we do. But they had lost sight of the purpose of the law that God had given them. They had lost sight of it. The purpose of that whole thing was drawing near to God, not just keeping the rules. And they had forgotten that the temple and the tabernacle, they were not the point. They were a means to an end. And the goal was drawing near to God himself. And to us, their hang-up in that old way with all the dietary restrictions and the clothing restrictions and the temple and the tabernacle and all that, that sounds weird to us. Like, why would they want to be part of that? But we need to ask ourselves, have we done the same thing with things that God have commanded us to do as well? Have we lost the why and some of the what of our obedience? Have certain things become so rote to us that we've forgotten that they were actually given to us by God, not as a rule to follow, but as a grace in order to draw us nearer to him? So when we read the scriptures, maybe you do chapter day, you sit down to do that. Are we just hunting for like an inspirational, tweetable quote? Something from the verse of the day that we can throw up on our Instagram story? Or are we actually searching God's words to know God himself? Have we lost the why and the what? Or when we pray, are we just checking a box before a meal? Or maybe for me, just trying to sound spiritual in a group? Are we just going through the motions, saying stuff that's on our mind? Or are we actually pouring out our hearts and our needs before a God who says, I want you to draw near and cast all your cares on me? Have we lost the why and the what? Or when we serve others, by the way, we are serving others, right? Using our gifts here in this church community or in our neighborhoods where we live, using the things that God has given us to make a difference for others. We are serving, right? Are we doing that for a pat on the back? Are we doing that for the resume? Get some more volunteer hours? Or are we living out our identity, following after Jesus, who said, as the ultimate servant, I didn't come to be served, but to serve? Have we lost the why and the what? Or how about this one? When we come together on Sundays, are we just checking a box, doing the thing that we all do so that we can move on with our day and go to Black Market Bakery or, go check out Double T, or maybe you're into First Watch. I don't know what your place is after this. Great restaurants, by the way, no judgment. We're just checking a box. It's just a thing that our family does. Actually makes me feel better about myself. Or are we gathering together with other people who have been purchased by the blood of Christ to worship our risen Savior? Have we lost the why and the what? Do you see how easy it would be for any religious expression to lose its way and to all of a sudden just be a status symbol or like a cultural marker that means I'm the kind of person who does these kinds of things, more than a means of connecting with and drawing near to God himself, who has given us access through the blood and the death of his Son? Maybe today is an opportunity to assess in our own mind and our own heart, have I lost the why and the what? Do I think to myself, I'm in the film business instead of the memory business? Am I in the rule-keeping business, or am I drawing near to God? Through his death, Jesus is the new way to draw near to God. And if we're learning anything from Hebrews, the thing we cannot fail to do is to see Jesus rightly and hold to Jesus tightly to the end. Let me pray. Jesus, we do bring ourselves to you this morning, hopefully humble enough to acknowledge that at times we have lost the why. We're checking boxes, we're going through routines, we're not even allowing our heart and mind to engage with what we know are just the habits that we're supposed to do, forgetting that you've given us all of this as a way to know you. Thank you that we can know you, that by your blood you've given access to sinful creatures to a God who loves them. Thank you for drawing near to us, for being our Emmanuel, for tabernacling with us, becoming flesh so that we could see what you're like. Pray that we would pursue you more this week because of what we've learned this morning, and we would do it together. All this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey guys, we hope to see you next week as we continue and enjoy Black Market Bakery. See you guys later.